All right, this is Module 2, Section 10, examples of what authentic and knowledgeable and trustworthy actually look like. And so in this video, we're looking to identify some tangible examples of those things, of what authentic, knowledgeable, and trustworthy relationships look like, and then their effectiveness in discipleship. And so you should have just read the chapters in Sean Anderson's book, which is called Living Dangerously. And you should have read those chapters that are describing those three things, authentic, knowledgeable, and trustworthy, as characteristics of a discipler. These three are so important to adopt, but they can also be a bit confusing to understand what we're actually talking about when we say that a discipler needs to be authentic or knowledgeable and trustworthy. What does that actually mean? Where do we go with this? I'm going to admit that the word authentic is a huge buzzword in the Christian world. You've heard things said, just be authentic and people respond. And this is something that I hear a lot. The problem is that we as pastors or disciplers and Christians just in general, we attempt to adopt the perception of authenticity that we believe will garner us an audience that will then listen to us. And this is actually the furthest thing from being authentic. And honestly, people can sniff out that kind of inauthentic way of living immediately. So what are some examples of authentic and knowledgeable and trustworthy characteristics in discipleship? I have a few that I'd really honestly love to share with you that I believe will help paint a better picture of what this really looks like on a discipleship level. And so first, authenticity is being your full self in front of the people that you're leading. If you are a big people person, you're the life of the party, you're silly, but you're compassionate and loving, then you need to be that. If you're more of a reserved, kind, and gentle, and yet you speak with power and intellect, then you need to be that. If you are short, but you're pretending to be tall, right? If you're unathletic and you hate sports, then don't pretend to love sports. Being authentic means allowing yourself to be on display to the people around you. Now, also, being your authentic self does not mean just embracing all of yourself and then simply sending a message to the people around you that says, look, if you don't like what you see, then that's your problem, and all that. You've heard it before. Of course, our authenticity, we are still self-aware and we put our best self forward, but we also allow people to see our flaws and our scars. And this really is what authenticity is all about. It's less about magnifying your introvertedness or your extrovertedness, your love for working out, although by all means express that, or your hatred for all things brown. I don't know if that's even really a thing. It's more about allowing the people around you to see you for who you are, which means that they see your imperfections and your passions. Authenticity doesn't hide behind a veil of perfection, but it also doesn't dwell on the imperfections. It's inauthentic to continually present your wounds to people in hopes of gaining sympathy from them. It's authentic to present your scars from past wounds that you have worked through while helping people see your love for whatever it is that you love. Movies, arts, paddleboarding, whatever it is. I had a guy in our church who came to us from our campus ministry at UW. The campus ministry is called Sojourn Campus Ministry. He was a part of our church for a couple of years, and then he and his wife moved to Idaho so that he could work on his med degree there. And they are just an amazing, beautiful couple. But I remember one day Jake tells me after a sermon that I had on one Sunday, he says, I have never heard a pastor admit to something like getting into arguments with their spouse. And I honestly don't remember the sermon at all, but I'm sure that I was talking about some disagreement that Laura and I got into either that week or, honestly, I don't know, somewhere in our past. And I don't tell stories like that, first of all, without Laura's permission, but certainly not to place myself in any kind of place of moral superiority, but simply to remind people that I make mistakes, that I'm a real human being. And Jake had never heard a pastor say something like that. But that's a part of my story with Laura. And so that's what authentic means. It's being yourself. What does the characteristic of knowledgeable mean? This is one that I've feared for most of my adult life. I have a good friend named Rachel, and when I told her that I was helping put together this course for a graduate program, I prefaced telling her that by saying, I honestly don't feel very smart, I don't feel smart enough, or like I have anything to say that people are going to be willing to listen to. And she's this little 70-year-old, woman. She's blind, and she turns to me and she just hits me as hard as she can. I'm walking her to my car so that I can take her home, and she just hits me as hard as she can. And she says to me, "Never say that again, Jared. You have what they wanted, and that's enough." See, being knowledgeable doesn't mean that you have to know all the right answers. It means that you have to be willing to go on a journey of discovering answers with people. My church over the past couple of years, basically everyone has been going through some kind of major question of faith, and I was getting peppered with all of these questions about angels and afterlife and the meaning of Greek words and how to answer the big hard questions of society and culture and so much more. And the thing that I learned is that if I pretend to know the answers to everything, then I will immediately be exposed for my actual lack of understanding and knowledge. I have degrees, I have master's degrees, but those take you only so far, right? And besides, what I discovered about knowledge that people are really actually looking for is they're not looking for all the answers right away. It's that they're looking for a framework for discovery. In my church, we have scientists and engineers and very successful business people. And if I fake it to make it, then I will immediately be discredited. Smarter people than me are asking me for answers to their big questions, not because they believe that I already know the answers to those questions, but because they believe that I'm willing to go on a journey of discovering the answers with them, and that I have a place to start. And so in the past couple of years, every time someone comes to me with a big question, I just suggest a book that, that person and I can read together. This is what adopting the characteristic of knowledge means. It means admitting when you don't know the answers to something, but that you're also willing to go on a journey of discovering answers with the person that is asking those questions. I'm actually going to make a resource page for this module with a lot of the books that I have been going through with people in our church, honestly, just so that you can see the diversity of questions and maybe some places where we sought some of those answers. And then so finally, what does it mean to be trustworthy? This is so important and yet so easily misunderstood. We often think that trustworthy means that people are wanting us to be confidential, with their struggles or their questions or their doubts or whatever it is. But this is only a part of what it means to be trustworthy. More often, I think that trustworthiness to people is their ability to trust that when they ask a question, they won't be judged. That they won't be heard as someone who is, less spiritual or not as smart. People want to know that if they reveal their heart and their soul to you, that you will respond in a way that sees them as a person, rather than simply a project or even a reject. Early on in our time in Seattle, I became friends with a guy who was a pretty successful guy who was working at Microsoft. And he and I would meet regularly, and he had a pretty bad drug addiction. So one morning we were supposed to meet for coffee, and he showed up strung out. And so he and I went to his apartment, and I just sat with him as we made decisions about how we were going to connect with different help around the city. We're going to connect with his employer, and I stayed with him in the midst of his crisis. He told me later that he had just wanted to call and cancel our coffee because he knew that he wasn't in a position to meet with me. But then he decided, look, no, I need Jared. I need him to see me like this. I trust him. See, trust is not just about keeping things confidential. It's a belief that if someone opens their heart and their deepest parts of their soul to you, that you won't treat them differently. But rather, you're going to receive the information that they're giving you, and you're going to step into a depth of relationship and care for that person that discipleship actually demands. And so just to finish my friend's story, he went to rehab. He's doing great. I performed his wedding a few years ago, and then recently he sent a picture of this beautiful baby boy that they've just had. So authentic, knowledgeable, trustworthy, these are three of the essential characteristics of a discipler, and what some examples of what that actually can look like in real life.